But I'll just start with certain housekeeping rules, just to keep in mind. Let's start by introducing ourselves in the chat box. You could type in your questions alongside the conversation, which we'll be taking up in the last 15 minutes of the session. But in case you have a question with a short response, we'll try to address your query in the chat itself. And if there's anybody who is not comfortable in English, हमारे पास एक इंटरप्रेटर भी है हिंदी में ट्रांसलेट करने के लिए. So kindly raise your hands or put it in the chat box and we'll enable that option. We have Evita represent us from the campaign who's willing to help with the translations. If there's anybody, कोई भी है जो comfortable नहीं है English में, हम हिंदी में भी option हमारे पास आज है. So please let us know. Okay. I saw one hand. Okay. ठीक है. Great. So I'll begin. Good evening, folks. My name is Saleha, and I, along with Riddhi, will be anchoring this introductory session of Ab Sheher Saath Banayengey. I say introductory as this is the first amongst many in the series and is intendedly curated to be open, public, and conversational for all. The theme for today's session is inclusion in planning or inclusive urbanism. We will be learning from past practices led by Professor Ribeiro, who has joined us from Goa today. He will be narrating his experiences with top-down planning in Delhi, working with the DDA and the emphasis of master plan from the 80s to now. Then we have with us Nidhi Batra speak about how bottom-up planning and people-centric planning can be strengthened in the present political economy and how we can tackle the current challenges in the plan and how we can make the plan more robust. And lastly, and certainly not the least, we have Amrita give us a projection for the future of inclusive urbanism, focusing more on how rather than the what of radical planning practice. But before that, we'll start with, I'll invite Riddhi from City Sabha and Rashi from IHS and the Bhi Dilli campaign. She's one of the coordinators, to share with us some of the inclusive planning principles that the campaign has adopted to build a people's movement from scratch. Riddhi, I'd hand it over to you. Are you able to share screen?
Yeah, thanks, Saleha. So I think we're just going to start with a quick presentation about
sorry, 1 second. I'll also request, since we're interpreting this entire session, for all speakers to speak a little slowly so it's easy for the interpreters as well.
Yeah. So I think we'll just start with a short description of what public spaces are in Delhi, because with our work in public spaces over the last couple of years, what we've just really realized is the sheer diversity that makes up Delhi's public spaces and how planning has to respond to the ground realities of what exists in the city, as opposed to being a top-down technocratic process. So these are just a few methods that have been employed in different cities across India and across the world to create better streets, in some cases to integrate informal markets with the existing land use and the spatiality of a city. And of course, in Delhi, our famous example of Rahagiri, where you have citizens that are finding their right to the city. So for the Bhi Dilli campaign, when we started to explore public spaces, we looked at about 8 different sectors, because at the intersection of caste, livelihoods, transportation, gender, heritage, disability, ecology, and housing lie public spaces. There's a lot of work to be done in all of these sectors to actually make public spaces inclusive and viable for the citizens of the city. And that's about it from us. We'd love to hear from all our speakers today about how past practices can inform the future of our city. Professor Ribeiro, sorry, Rashi first, I'd like to hand it over to you to talk about the campaign.
So I'm not going to take too much time at all. I don't want to stand between all the great speakers that are there and take too much of anyone's time. I just want to quickly say that Bhi Dilli has been working since 2008, and we are, it has been a great sort of learning experience for all of us within the campaign to understand how planning works in Delhi and how we can increase the scope of traditional urban planning knowledge systems to informality that exists in our city, that is very much part of the culture of Delhi. And how can then an inclusive planning document be created? Within the campaign, we started off really looking at informal housing and informal livelihoods. And through a lot of conversations, these were made intersectional. So how do we connect housing to our livelihoods? And why that link in a city like Delhi or any city around the world is critical. Then a lot of gender rights activists joined the campaign and pushed to have a strong gender lens in housing and livelihoods. And we worked to amalgamate some of these very intersectional needs that exist, and to say that even in gender, to say that it's not just an able-bodied woman. You know, there are different types of gender. Gender is a spectrum, and how do we include these voices? Very late in the day, I would say we missed, you know, this lens very critically, but disability and caste was also something that later on we said we were able to find, you know, we don't call anybody an expert, but like really say activists who have a deep knowledge of what disability rights are and what caste rights are and what are the discriminations that occur because of this, that they were able to join in and also sort of add a lot of strength to the intersectional sort of understandings that the campaign was trying to build. So that is our learning really has been that this takes time. We started in 2018 and it has taken us a good 3 years, much like the National Institute of Urban Affairs, to draft this document, to really sort of bring together many voices and to really see what participatory research can look like. So, and also to form a different kind of language itself. We've sort of attempted that. A lot of researchers who are part of the campaign, urban planners and architects, have been able to sort of break down that very technocratic language, but they have also sort of learned from what the lived realities or the ground realities are. And so our fact sheets are a very wonderful example of that new form of language, really, where you can very simply, anybody can read, and these are of course in Hindi, they're in Urdu, they're in English, so that, you know, we don't continue to have language barriers in planning, and they don't remain limited to English speaking and English understanding audiences. So really these have been some of our attempts at making planning inclusive within the campaign. And I'd hand over back to Saleha to, you know.
Thanks, Rashi. So I will not really get into the depths of the campaign. We can take questions in the chat box below. But Professor Ribeiro, I will hand it over to you, since you will be sharing with us planning narratives from the past in conjunction with Delhi's evolution. What, in your view, has been some radical policies, decisions that you see have come to fruition now or in the past decade or so? You can answer it in your presentation or you know, in the question answer round. That's I'll leave it to you. So Professor Ribeiro, please.
Thank you very much for asking me to join this webinar. It's very important. And I'm very impressed with what you all are doing. I would like to start off with a very, very small narrative. My last consultancy was in 2013 in Lakshadweep. And it was a court-appointed involvement to propose some development control guidelines for the 10 inhabited islands of Lakshadweep, population of 60,000 then total. And because it was court-appointed, we had a wonderful chairman, Justice Ravindran. And amazing that whatever I proposed, there were other members in the team, but as a planner, I proposed some very simple guidelines and they were accepted by the court. And the important thing of those guidelines was I was happy because it was participatory. The people participated in it and we were able to propose things that went through. But the important thing is, during our discussions and visits to all these islands, Justice Ravindran told me a wonderful thing. He says, you know, I've been in the judiciary all my life, and whenever I've given decisions on land and land use, if they've been wrong, it's because the plans which you all have prepared were wrong. Your planners do not know your strength. If plans have to be simple and they have to be easily understood. And if your plans are wrong, then our decisions are wrong. So that is the importance of the planner on the use of the land. I learned this late in life. So plans and how we read plans and how we prepare plans, if people do not understand it, there are hardly any plans, especially the common man. I think with that as introduction, what is the meaning of planning? Planning is, there are various forms of planning, but the two forms of planning which were in conflict and today, hopefully they are in unison, is the socio-economic investment planning by the then Planning Commission, now Niti Aayog, and the 5-year plans, what they call, it was really for investments. And the other kind of planning was what we now call spatial development planning or town planning, urban development planning, and so on. These things worked separately. They relegated development planning to municipalities and so on. And socio-economic planning was always liked by governments because that is where your finances came and people were more interested in getting the finances for development. But the whole context which the two could give has only happened recently thanks to various things like 73rd, 74th Amendment, etc. Today, I feel that there is a convergence and the kind of objective which is today emerging is, which I think can be put into a small frame, spatial development plans for socio-economic investments for sustainable development. I think that is the theme from now on for us to follow. This is one starting statement which I would like to make. Planning historically is a late entry compared to engineering and architecture and other people involved with the built environment. But historically, it was brought into India due to the Bombay plague. And to overcome the plague, the presidency government of Bombay said, what we really need is an improvement trust to help the municipality regulate the cities. And that led to ultimately to the first town planning act in the country, the Bombay Town and Country Planning Act, which applied to the whole of the Bombay presidency. This enabled in quick succession acts for Hyderabad state, then Mysore state, Madras state, the United Provinces, and so on. But one thing about those acts were, it was urban planning giving you a framework for what improvement trusts and municipalities did to urban areas. It was not comprehensive planning in that sense. Comprehensive planning really emerged in India after independence. And the first act which was introduced was the Delhi Development Act. So that is a forerunner of acts. There was another act which was a little different to that, was the Bombay Act, called the Modak Plan. So the Delhi Development, the Delhi Master Plan, and a few years later, the Bombay Development Plan were the two forerunners of all our planning practices, largely one north of the Vindhyas and one south of the Vindhyas. So why did the Delhi development, why was the master plan required? It was required due to unprecedented influx into Delhi due to partition. In fact, between the census years of 2000 and 1941 to 51, Delhi grew by 114% in a decade. And that is where the services broke down. There's been a lot of debate ever since. What does it mean by breaking down of services? That is, what can municipalities service for adequate growth? And the debate then was anything over 40% was bad. And that plan and that city required corrections. Much later, the National Commission on Urbanization reduced it to 30%. So this is one important area to be seen. I call the Delhi plan as not really a plan to replicate elsewhere in many ways, simply because it was a top-down plan. It continues as a top-down plan. And it became necessary. And we really used foreign consultants to prepare that plan. The Fort Count Foundation, who used Indian counterparts, all trained abroad. They were my seniors in a way, because I came in the 60s. And so they said a plan would solve all your problems. Now, a plan, which is a spatial plan, really means on how land can be used and to what intensity. So there is a framework, and that is what it did. So the Delhi Development Act was really, Delhi did have an improvement trust in 37. The Delhi Development Authority took over from the improvement trust. It was not a new authority in that sense, but it was the act which said that it had two important roles, that you will prepare a master plan for a 20-year period, perspective of 20 years with 5-year programs for the whole of the just the Union Territory of Delhi. And it will be supported, it will be disaggregated by zoning plans. And zones in those days were distributed into 9 zones, 8 development zones in about 1/3 of the land, and 1 single rural zone. Now, to make that plan operational, they said municipal government should also be reorganized. So the MCD was brought in by amalgamating a series of local bodies existing at the time into 1 single MCD. And also, they said that we will use a land policy. The central government introduced a land policy, which was that land will be in public control, and it will be introduced a land bank, land as a resource. Now, all these things were not very easy to implement because it was a total aspect of a plan for the people and no involvement of the people at all. And where there was involvement, it was reduced. It could only happen because the Ford Foundation were very powerful and the Prime Minister at that time was also, everything depended on him. They convinced Pandit Nehru, in 20 years, it will solve all your problems. Delhi will be an orderly city. Well, so please remember, apart from preparing a master plan and disaggregating it into the zones, which today from 9 zones, you've got 18 zones covering the whole of the Union territory, now called the, since then called the NCTD, is you prepare a master plan and for these zones. Now, people then said, if we're going to prepare zonal plans, how do we disaggregate it at the local level? So they introduced a concept of sub-zonal plans. Now, sub-zonal plans is not specified in the master plan, but a very interesting thing arose. When there were objections and suggestions to the master plan, there were only 600 objections and suggestions. They were mainly suggestions because it was the first time we were doing planning and a lot of people suggested how Delhi could be controlled and it could grow. But when there were objections and suggestions for sub-zonal plans, which they found it difficult to prepare zonal plans for some reason, and they went down to sub-zonal plans. One sub-zonal plan of a zone within the walled city, there were 22,000, no suggestions, but objections. And if you looked at the population there, that was about 40,000 families, almost everyone objected to what the sub-zonal plan was doing to their property. And since then, they found out you don't need this sub-zonal plan. You only stick to your mandate of master plans and zonal plans, but that left a vacuum. And what is that vacuum? That continued. So master plan, which we are called the first master plan, but there's provision to prepare a master plan in perpetuity and increase its lifespan every 20 years. So in that first lifespan of 20 years, they said, oh, we're having 2.3 million people in Delhi at the start. It's going up to 6.3 as per our projections. We can't go beyond 5.7. So you deflect population, and you had the first concept of urban-rural and the first concept of regional to some extent through the ring towns. It was a concept of Delhi and the ring towns of Gurgaon, Faridabad, Ghaziabad, and so on. Noida and Greater Noida didn't exist in those days. That was the regional concept, and that is what emerged. Unfortunately, the ring towns grew because we told them to grow from deflected population, and there was no control on Delhi, so they both grew, and that was a disadvantage. So this required a proper NCR. So the first update of the plan, which is, I will call it, refer it to as the second plan for the period 82 to 2001. I was then involved with the DDA from my parent office, the TCPO. A very major decision was taken by the government that we will create an NCR planning board. It was not easy to create an NCR planning board because it was treading on the toes of state laws. So decisions had to be taken by the states. We agreed to such a board, and provided that board is for the everyone's good. The TCPO said you need a much larger region of 30,000 square kilometers. It was a very arbitrary region, and a plan was prepared for that, where you had a bigger canvas to deflect population to. So we had a deflection of population, and we controlled Delhi. Then instead of growing to 12 million, it was going to 13. We tried to restrict it to 11. Instead, the regions didn't grow properly and all that sort of things. this brought us to the third plan of 2001 to 2021, which was a very structured plan. And I'll tell you why. Because they said that this particular, we had the advantage by then of the constitutional amendment. And they said there's no point in looking at Delhi just arbitrarily by cutting through the lines of governance. So they said we will include all the districts involved. And that plan was more popularly known for implementation as a 22 district plan. The single district of Delhi became 9, 5 districts of UP, 7 districts of Haryana. We remember the chief minister saying you've taken 60-70% of Haryana, you take the rest also. So, and 1 district of Rajasthan, from Alwar Tehsil, it became Alwar district, the 3rd largest district in India at that time. This 50,000 square kilometers, when it became a 22 district plan, the involvement of governance emerged. The district gazetteers, etc., all gave you information, and it was easy to propose implementation guidelines with finances as incentives, all to deflect population from Delhi. Today, we are on the 4th plan. We are using that plan, and there are a lot of improvements we feel which are required to. From a ring town concept, we have reached this kind of a concept. Now, when I talk of the first plan 2, when we talk of a down-top concept, the Delhi plan of 61-62 did not have any participation of the public. I'm getting a little, that's fine. It had the concept of urban and rural. That has to be important. The municipal corporation had an urban wing and a rural wing. Today, we have to look at any investments, any planning in Delhi in its present context. The master plan of 41 does mention this, but it has to be properly identified. An important map is missing in their proposal. I mentioned it in my objections, that the governance map has become the most important map. Delhi today is not a single municipal corporation entity. It has got 3 corporations. 1 council, it was a committee, an ND municipal committee to regulate the growth of the capital. Now it is a council, municipal council, but without, and it has got the cantonment planning board. It has got no panchayats and no rural implication. So when you talk of villages, the villages have got no reason to function as villages. So when they mention villages, but in my, a village is that component of the Lal Dora without a rural function. So when you have a village on the periphery, it has to fulfill urban uses. In a periphery, what is an urban use? Urban agriculture or something like that. But this is what the plan has to be done. It is important to note that the plan for Delhi is a metropolitan megacity plan in its entirety. It cannot be dealt in isolation. It has to be dealt in the context of the NCR, because the NCR calls Delhi the core of the NCR. So Delhi in reality is the metropolitan core of the megacity region. It's the megacity core of the megacity region. And the mega city region is related to not only the other mega city regions and other regions of India, but also for exchange of indicators for growth to other cities. For example, if in Bangalore, they wanted to stop too much of investments of the information technology about 30 years ago, then the government of India suggested alternatives like Noida, etc. But investors were saying, no, for us, it is a city to city. We may find Seoul or Bangkok more acceptable. So there were these kind of conflicts which exist. So we have to look at Delhi, as the core, as the central core of the NCR, and we have to make sure that it cannot survive or remain as a top-down entity, which it continues being. There is a huge missing link. The link of laying down how land should be used at the smallest level from the earlier experience has not been fully addressed. That is where the whole issue of down top comes in. That is where the local area plans has been proposed. Now, I mentioned this today. People are saying, what is the provision for local area plans? There are conflicts are still going on. But in Goa, where I am at the moment, only a week ago, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India has asked, in looking at these smart city projects, with Panjim as a smart city, he says, look, in the constitutional amendment, Schedule 12, which says that 18 functions will be performed by the municipalities of India, town and country planning is mentioned as one of those. How are you addressing that question? I mean, are they doing town and country planning? The fact is that town and country planning is being done by the state government through its chief town planner through regional plans. And it is being disaggregated further either through them or their own planning and development authorities for municipalities and panchayat plans. But the local plan, which are with the elected wards, they are saying they will do the local plans and we'll call them local area plans. This has not been formalized, but I presume if they give this kind of an answer to the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, that would be correct. So the question is, local area plans are required. To do local area plans in Delhi, I must inform you all that a previous Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Tejinder Khanna, had ordered pilot studies. He liked the concept of local area plans, which he as Lieutenant Governor was able to push through. I was his consultant for that, then one of my last consultancies. And he engaged 5 groups from Delhi to help us. School of Planning and Architecture of Delhi, Delhi chapter of INTAC, Jamia Millia, Ambedkar University, and AMDA, Association of Municipalities and Development Authority, because I was involved with it then, and to do pilot studies in different areas. I will give my experiences, one of the finest ones, relating to heritage, which is a very critical area. That we left to the Delhi chapter of INTAC. And they did some pilot studies. And we were able to show only on that plan the touch me nots. So the great fear that local area plan that people will start objecting to decisions taken at the top is not correct, because the main policy is when your investments through central, state, concurrent and state acts has to be respected And if they are proved to be correct for that area according to the plan, then local area plans and the processing of local area plans has to fit into that. So citizens have to know that what are the things we have to accept and what are the things we are entitled to do. It's small experiences in Delhi, we are finding a lot of success in that. But here in Delhi, we have found it is through local area plans we have been able to identify only now the area under the control of the Archaeological Survey of India, which you cannot touch. The Archaeological Survey at that time were not indicating it. Furthermore, that act has been further strengthened by saying there'll be a no development zone and a regulated development zone, 100 meters and 300 meters minimum around it, which will be regulated by a National Monuments Authority. So this has to be shown. Then the State Archaeology Supplemental Act, Delhi has got quite a thing, and with their own rules have to be shown. And then the buildings and to be conserved by the intact list have also to be shown. Which is the platform which is going to show it? It is this platform through which the people will understand. Another small experience before I wind up is in one of the areas on the outskirts of Delhi, we showed them the plan, and our consultant who was working in that area showed how this infusion of people's growth could take place. At that time, the single municipal corporation had changed over to 3, and the elected council corporator at that time from 1 became 3. There was an educated lady, let me say she represented then the Congress party. Another educated lady, which was on the periphery, she represented Mayawati's party, and the seasoned corporator represented the BJP. And he suddenly saw that plan, and there were 2 lines, which was 100 meters. 100 meters on the master plan looks like a thick road. On that plan, it looked massive. He said, what are these lines? I said, that's a master plan road. He says, I've got 5,000 juggies. What am I going to do? Yes, who's responsible? Has anyone seen it? And see, that is where planners are like, we all sit in an ivory tower and do these plans without understanding what problems we will face. So the local area plans will indicate it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fright of planners today to undertake that. They feel comfortable not doing it. There is a lot of reason for elected second tier of MPs, not so much because their constituency could be 2.5 to 3 million, but assembly, especially in a small state like Goa, when you say that 29 items under the schedule will be handled by panchayats and 18 items will be handled by municipalities, all these items, most of it were being handled by them. So their powers are going, right? So there are these kind of objections being raised. But once this is explained, and importantly, the people are involved in it, it is a great platform and every effort should be made. In fact, I've been telling a lot of students to take their selection, take your own village, take your own ward and find out what are the jurisdictions. The map, the relevant map for Delhi, which can be prepared, it's available, we did it, is to map out the jurisdictions of the wards. It took us 6 months of our time-bound period to do the plans to get that map done. And those maps were with the councillors because that was their, you see, they said that is our area, but the important thing is it's not only your area, it's your accountability. And when you talk of people, it's the whole lot of them. I can give you many experiences of local area plans, how they work in stages. In Calcutta, in Kerala, even in Mumbai, though they take their ward is a collection of real wards, but whatever it is. So this is one kind of a background. which I would like to share at this stage. And thanks for this. I overshot my time, but I'm sorry about it. Thank you. I can always share.
Thanks,
Personally.
Professor Edgar, for that roadmap of Delhi's history of planning. This is really insightful and much to mull over. Nidhi, without much ado, after, like you should start presenting, if you're presenting, that is. I just had a question to leave you with, which is, after having studied the current draft plan of 2041, what in your view are some of the big loopholes that need to be deliberated, and what can we learn from other cities and from your local work that you've been doing over the years?
Thanks, Aleha. Professor Ribeiro, it was a great session, and to continue after you is itself a big thing. But I'm going to build up on the narrative that you said. So a lot about the local area plan itself and our experience in working in one of the urban village of Delhi, which is Mehrauli. So Aleha, I'm just trying to share my window. Just a second. Is this visible to you all?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I will touch base on the question, Saleha, which you mentioned in terms of the loopholes in the master plan. What I'm trying to address through this presentation is an experience of how, when you're trying to do a community embedded planning or something where you're trying to engage community in the planning instrument, we require a hook. A hook in the master plan to say that there is an instrument for people to plan for their own neighborhood, in their own area. And at present, I feel the current master plan does not have that enough. And as Professor Ribeiro mentioned, local area plan was a great instrument which was conceptualized in the earlier master plans. In fact, I was on the SPA team trying to develop the Vasant Vihar local area plan. Unfortunately, they did not get implemented. And this exploration today, which I'm sharing, is on a similar lines. So I'm going to give a brief about our work in the urban village of Mehrauli and what are the challenges we've been facing in that area to really plan with the community. And we have been working in Mehrauli since 2014. With this another organization called GREHA, where Professor Ganju was the president of GREHA. So in fact, we started by doing a study which was sponsored by INTAC for the Mehrauli heritage area back in 2014. It had to become the local area plan for Mehrauli, but somehow it did not materialize. It wasn't a very big amount either. It was a 96 lakhs project that we had conceptualized. It had a lot of community participation as a major element in it, but it did not materialize, and this was back in 2014. By 2015, we formed a set of collective, which we called ourselves the Mehrauli Collective. So there was GREHA, which was anchoring it, and my organization, which is Sheher, and a couple of other organizations. And we started voluntarily working in Mehrauli, irrespective of the fact that nobody had hired us to work in Mehrauli. We started in 2016, again with INTAC, we conducted something called a sense of history workshop. The idea was that if Mehrauli is an historic village, is there a sense of history that the community themselves have of this historic village? And our whole assumption was that the act of building in any historic village or in the city is actually done by people. They make their own homes. They're making their own homes in the urban village of Mehrauli. So they themselves need to be responsible for maintaining those homes, thereafter responsible for the urban renewal of that settlement and taking care of the entire area. Now, how do you do that for a settlement like Mehrauli? And whether history, whether heritage plays any role at all was what we were exploring in our workshops back in 2016. Thereafter, what we've been doing since then, actually, we started interacting with the local councillors. We started interacting a lot with local MLA, Naresh Yadav, of the Mehrauli ward itself, trying to figure out whether we can have a community-led urban development plan or urban regeneration plan for the Mehrauli settlement. We also engaged with the district magistrate of South Delhi to figure out where do we position this plan? How do we make this plan? Thankfully, that time, the district magistrate was Amjad Tak, and he was very proactive and very supportive. And he did support us to hold these interdepartmental meetings in Mehrauli itself. For example, our focus was on redevelopment of a public space in Mehrauli, this node, which is the Adam Khan node, which has the Mehrauli bus stop. It is the entrance to the Mehrauli village. It's away from the Qutub Minar of Mehrauli, or the Ecological Park is on the other side. Sanjay One is on the other side. Not this area is mostly visited by the locals. It's a major hub for them. And we wanted to develop it as a public node, talk about traffic management, thereafter enter the Mehrauli settlement and look at various issues of health, of sanitation, of urban renewal, skills, livelihoods, and many other things. But this was supposed to be the entry point. And we realized that, like in any part of the city, it is a contested area. It is also an area where a lot of departments work together. So here there is an ASI monument. There are proposals by the DJB, there are proposals which MCD is doing. There is Sanjay One behind. There is a very strong RWA. There's a very strong shopkeepers association, which is there. So how do you, and then there's a Christian community. There is a Hindu community. There are lots of aspects that you have to navigate or negotiate to develop something like this. And we were trying to meet the local councillor and the MLA and the district magistrate to figure out where would all of this fit in. Nothing much materialized. They all gave us a lot of ear. We developed plans, but it just ended up like that. So we figured, okay, let us do some proactive activities ourselves. And we started engaging with the community. And we started hosting these workshops or series of workshops, almost like how you're doing in Bhi Dilli right now, called Hamari Mehrauli. And these were done from August 2016. And some of them were like the last one we did was about 2 years ago. And they covered various aspects of Mehrauli. And they were all interdisciplinary workshops. It was necessary for somebody from the community to be part of it. We called the RWA. We had different professionals, not just a planner or a designer. We had a sociologist, we had anthropologists, we had historians, we had economists, we had landscape architects. We had a lot of interdisciplinary interactions to understand Mehrauli layer by layer. So for example, we started looking at public spaces and how can you activate public spaces? What do people want from their public spaces? We looked at understanding Mehrauli ecologically. So somebody from Ambedkar University anchored that workshop. We looked at capturing narratives from Mehrauli. So we did a podcast workshop where we taught people how to make a podcast, and we actually recorded stories of Mehrauli. And all of these workshops were like 2 or 3 days workshop. For example, the first one was about audible landscapes in this Shamshi Talab area where we want to activate this public space. There was a lot of tension between the users here. So one part of the space was used mostly by men, either playing cards or drinking in the middle of the day. And the mothers were not favoring the children to go in this space. So what could we do to really revive this space? So we held a lot of these workshops, again, with RWA was part of it, a lot of designers. Children were focused here because we wanted children to come and activate this space. And we conducted various installations in the matter of 2 days to see how something like this can be activated. Similarly, we held something called Mehrauli Talkies, where we first taught people how to actually capture community narratives. And we went into the community, and our participants, which were a mix of the community themselves, some volunteers from Nehru Yuva Kendra, and the other participants of the workshop, they created or captured stories. In fact, one of them captured a story on women issues and the lack of security in Mehroli, and we further shared it with the police station there. The police station was very kind to us. They allowed us to host many of the workshops from their own community center, which they had in the police station. So we became a familiar face in Mehroli, and people started coming and approaching us. And we started sharing these insights with the local people there. We did many workshops with children in Mehroli for them to understand, the historicity or the heritage areas of Mehroli and what do they make sense of it. Ambedkar University made a neighborhood museum in our time in Mehroli. So we showed the evolution of Mehroli, and we showed stories which people themselves shared. There were photographs which people shared of their earlier era. They shared about the Unani medicines of Mehroli, what would they want to preserve. So we created those kind of projects and various other things. Thereafter, in 2017, we again went back to the planning authority with a plan which we now call the Mehroli Environment Improvement Plan. Now, this was to be an integrated plan, not just a spatial plan, but we wanted to look at public health, we wanted to look at mobility, we wanted to look at community, skills, livelihoods, history, tangible and intangible assets. And we submitted this to the district magistrate, who was very keen to do something like this. Howsoever, we were told that we need to find a framework in which something like this can fit in. So where in our master planning framework do we say that, we want to make a plan for Mehroli? We are a civil society organizations which have been working with the community. The community wants this proposal. Where do we submit it? Who takes it further? So we were advised, in fact, we also gave the submission for UN Habitat. Their objection was also, please get the local authority in place. So we were told that, go find a hook in some existing policies where you can anchor something like that. So we were told the Swadesh Darshan scheme, which is a tourism scheme, to anchor this local area plan that we were making for Mehroli. Now, if you realize Swadesh Darshan's focus is largely about tourist districts, even though this has a certain amount of funding which is available, we realize that this is not enough for the kind of integrated plan that we are talking about. Thankfully, we've also been interacting with the MLA, who's Naresh Yadav, and he informally constituted what we are calling as the MLA Planning Board, where some of us who are the professionals, community members, civil society members, he himself and various citizens are coming together. We interact sometimes on WhatsApp, we interact on Zoom, where we want to create a model ward. So when Professor Ribeiro said about ward level planning, I think this has become so significant to us because we realize that here is this MLA who has a vision for his ward, who wants to take help from professionals to implement that vision. But again, he's shortchanged because there either isn't enough funds, either he does not know how to translate that vision, and he does not see how the master planning framework can actually be beneficial for him. Now, again, we have given another proposal, and Ambedkar University has given for a community museum in Mehroli. But even till now, we are still finding, like I said, some hooks in the master plan where we can say that, okay, there is a space for community to design and plan for themselves. Now, if you look at the master plan, and Saliha, going back to your question, the various special zones which are mentioned in the master plan, such as the influence zone plan, heritage precincts, integrated green development plan, cultural resource management plan. Now, in all of this, this example which I showed about community embedded urban regeneration plan for Mehroli just doesn't fit in. Where do we propose something like that? Where can a MLA go and say that I want to make my ward a model ward? I want to plan for my ward. Where does that come in the master plan aspect? In fact, we had a meeting with NIUA yesterday, and we again proposed this, and they're pretty open to the idea of putting a line like this within the master plan, where the MLA or such kind of authorities can also talk about community-led planning to happen. Local area plan was supposed to be that instrument, but like Mr. Ribeiro said, that vacuum is still existing even in the present plan. And that is what we were trying to address now. In fact, if look at the master plan right now, the chapter for urban villages and the urban regeneration of urban villages is not even there. urban villages are only being looked as these new areas which can be gentrified, but regeneration of urban villages by the community members themselves has not been addressed. And as we were informed, they are working on the chapter of urban villages also to come into the master plan as of now. Then there are various other aspects, and this is something which we were discussing also earlier, that what is it that cities can do? And here I'm just sharing some examples. Now, for this Meroli example, which was largely started as a public space, and this is the first time in Delhi where the master plan has actually a chapter and a so-called implementation framework for public space. What I realized was that's not enough. There is no public space management plan, which should be supporting this public space vision, which the master plan has spoken about. Who will make those public spaces? Who can propose that a public space needs to come in my neighborhood? Who would, let's say, design that? Who would assess that something will come there? All of that can be part of a management plan, and it is the responsibility of the ULB really to come and play a role. As of now, the municipal councils in Delhi don't have any role to play in respect to spatial planning, and our ward MLA does not play as much as a role either. But this needs to be strengthened, and here there are examples in the West where there are these kind of public space management plan which have been made, and these are not dead master plan that once you made and they're done, but these are live dynamic documents. Similarly, age-old idea of participatory budgeting, which can be actually done at the ward level, has not much been explored in our city. What if our master plan can actually have at least one mention of participatory budgeting as an instrument where planning could be integrated? Then this example of Paris, where they are actually taking ideas from the community members themselves that suggest how would you actually beautify your neighborhood. Now, these are all actions where community can play a role in different ways. I'm just leaving this with this. This is an example from UN Urban Habitat, where they're talking about making a collective like a committee, where authority, where community experts like you and I, who probably have learned this, come together, and this support in this vision of planning, or let's say a public space. If I'm taking an example of public space, now that vision of a public space, like this node in Adam Khan tomb at Meroli, can be actually anchored by the MLA himself. Now, can the MLA take it forward to the public space management plan, which has a hook in the master plan? And all of this needs to be a dynamic instrument. It can't be just a one-time instrument. And this is where I say that, please give a hook in the present master plan for something like this to emerge. Now, master plan is a document for 20 years. It cannot say that there will be no community participation because it is difficult to address, or there will be no local area plan because it is difficult to do that. It needs to leave a provision. Times are changing. This entire exercise where you and I are discussing about master plans did not happen before. So community participation definitely has become mainstream, and it will become even more so in the coming years. So there needs to be provision of that in the master plan is what I feel. And that's what I'm leaving it at. I think DDA, like Professor Ribeiro gave us the lineage of it, was a developer. It is now thinking it is a regulator, but till the time it plays a role of a facilitator, I don't think this master plan will become the document that you and I are envisioning to be. So that's from me, and love to hear your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Nidhi. Fantastic points you raised. I'll save my questions till the end, and we'll swiftly move to Amrita Balal. So Amrita, I have a question for you, and which is about the future. To me, I'm not a pessimist, but it seems very grim to me. And I'm sure a lot of you share similar sentiments, but how could interested citizens predict for what lies ahead? And how could we structurally change how we think about planning and place governance? I'll leave you with that, and we'll take up the questions right after your presentation.
Thank you so much, Saleha. Well, your question is very valid, but also quite overarching in one sense. 1 second. Yeah, this is what I wanted to dwell on when I first got the invitation, because following through from Professor Ribeiro's really insightful overview of the evolution of planning and Nidhi's sort of deep dive into sort of the present challenges, very real challenges that come up in real time, working at the ground level, despite all the sort of complicated, complex, and well-intentioned planning proposals. I have the slightly tricky task of projecting into the future, because there couldn't be a better or worse time to do this exercise, because what an unexpected year we've all had. And I think I'll avoid getting too specific about the future, whether its possibilities or its challenges, because as Joe Biden probably realized in today's date, if you talk about the future with specificity, it gets old really soon. But I want to really speak about, I mean, drawing from both Professor Ribeiro's talk and Nidhi's, really, I think to talk about planning, we have to first talk about cities. That, I think, at this point of time, for me, in this whole structure, the idea of narratives is actually quite key to the idea of the future of the cities per se. Because we have a lot, you know, and as Professor Ribeiro said, that when we started off with experts, in fact, international experts who worked with our experts. And there was, at that time, as there's now, we have all the complex data, we have policy, we have governance, we have predictive models. But I think eventually where, for example, the example of local area plans really meeting with a resistance, both from top up as well as bottom down in terms of objections or resistance to objections. And the need that Nidhi actually spoke about hooks is that in every example, one has to really start the conversation of inclusive planning and what our expectations from the city are from scratch. And I think for that, one thing that I've noticed, and it's very illustrative in the work that Bhi Dilli as well as the sort of planning bodies have been doing of late over the master plan, is that one needs to have a broader conversation about cities and their expectations before we delve into the specifics of planning and objections to technical documents. The future is very unpredictable, but one of the things that we are very clear on now is that for the first time in our planetary history, we are in the Anthropocene. So as humans, it's not a geological event as was with the last epochs. Human beings and our ways of being are altering life on the planet profoundly. So that's a once in a planet event. And very linked to this is what we are calling the urban age now, which again is a once in a species event. Cities have been around for millennia. However, we have never as a species been predominantly urban dwellers. So I think in some ways, one has to also realize that this is a profound shift with some massive sort of stability. And what we are doing with all these planning processes is to sort of cling to prediction and cling to some sort of like stability, whereas in some ways, really dynamic models are needed and a risk-taking capacity that is empathetic is needed. So here is where we are right now when it comes to sort of thinking about the future. The IPCC has actually used the word code red, and that's one sort of aspect of a future. And recently I saw this sort of article on the future look of New Delhi railway station. And I think we have to remember that our future is going to be about our dreams as much as our realities. It's going to be about our fears as much as our aspirations. And in some ways, to have a cohesive future is how we actually look at the intersectionality and conflicts of these two aspects. And the task in front of us is really profound. I mean, we're talking about the MPD 2041, right? And we all acknowledge that it's a complex exercise, but I would like all of us to take a minute to really think of where we will be personally in 2041. I will be a senior citizen. You know, at this moment, I have no imagination of how it will be to be in my own shoes in 20 years. However, in master planning exercises, and especially MPDs of similar to like Delhi, we are trying to be in the shoes of 22 million citizens, eventually 30 million citizens. It's a profound exercise. One of the things that I find has given me a sort of a framework to at least absorb all the information and engage with it is the aspect of urban ecological thinking. And I'm a little averse to adding more jargon to a field which is already full of really expansive words. But I think what's interesting for me in this sort of mindset is to really look at things as a really interconnected and living whole, which is sort of like rooted in the environment of the cities, but really acknowledging that communities and societies are part of the ecological framework. And I think that takes us back in some ways to how cities in the past were always planned, that societies really mapped environmental and ecological systems, and cities that could work with that thrived and the others really collapsed. And we are sort of, our future is back to learning some lessons of our past. And why I want to speak about imagination is really what cities we will have in the future has a lot to do with the cities as we understand them today. And these are two very different court rulings. You know, one is where the court ruled that the Daryaganj Book Bazaar, this really temporal, vibrant, the master plan says that Delhi should be vibrant, but this would just come up like literally by magic in the old city, activate the space on a Sunday where traffic was actually really less. And the court ruled that the Daryaganj Book Bazaar has to go from where it currently stays and be boxed in somewhere because it was a quote unquote traffic impediment on a Sunday. On the other hand, you have something like the Central Vista, which I won't go into the merits or the massive demerits of the design, but at its very basic, a huge area of land use, which was designated as public use in the symbolic heart of urban heart of the nation, was actually taken away for government use. And it was notified as government use, and there was no compensatory public use, symbolic or otherwise, actually officially notified. What's interesting is that the court really, in its wisdom, saw that there was, it could not or would not stop that, stop the Central Vista, but it could and would move the book bazaar. This has a lot to do with how, and this is not on the wise men sitting in the court. It has a lot to do with our collective imagination of the city as a society, you know, as urban dwellers. This is again something which is a very useful, teachable tool. This is Scenic Farms, which has a lot of politicians, policymakers, journalists, you name it. And next to it is Sangam Vihar, which is its sort of status is transitory at this point of time, but is one of the largest unauthorized settlements in the country. And as you can see, Scenic Farm, which is also unauthorized, has a fair degree of resource use, consumption, and impact. But our stereotypes or our imaginations of cities and what it actually means to encroach really will imagine a Sangam Vihar, but it will not imagine a Central Vista, and it will not imagine a Scenic Farm. And the antidote to a lot of this is planning, which I do agree with. But here's the tricky part, this is really interesting, the ladder of participation, which starts from manipulation therapy as non-participation. Informing consultation placation is a tokenism. Citizen control delegation partnership is where you're actually looking at participatory planning. When I first saw this diagram almost a decade back, I remember thinking that we really need one ladder below non-participation in India, which is actually non-existence in some point. Because a lot of planning documents actually negate entire communities, entire livelihoods, entire ways of being. And even therapy and manipulation is a step up. And it's interesting to me, the name Bhi Dilli, because the incredible work that the campaign has been doing, but the title is to actually acknowledge existence. It's not, the title of the campaign is not "we can do better," is "please acknowledge our existence." So that's where we are at participation. And one of the things that I want to highlight, which will be enormous for our future, is that when we say participation, most of us in the design and planning field really act as interpreters of maladies, going from one agency to the other, and those in part being to hear communities left out of planning processes. Even that is a big victory. But the entire profession, even this panel is illustrative. We come from very similar socioeconomic backgrounds. Most people who dwell in the city and are impacted by decisions of people like us have entirely different lived experiences, and they are not represented in the plan. They might get a seat at the table, but very rarely as decision makers or as planners themselves, as citizen planners themselves. And I think that's really, as education gets more and more privatized, the absence of diversity in the profession itself is going to create trouble for our future possibilities. Because when we say public participation, it really, the reasons that ward level plans fail, etc., is a deficit of trust. We had this experience with the village development plans in Dwarka, 4 villages for the first time. There was a development plan, and despite our best efforts, the fine-grained participation, there was a checklist of participation. There were 3 or 4 presentations, etc., very generic. But in the village, everyone was concerned about what will happen to his own plot of land. It was the same as Dr. Ribeiro had mentioned in the old city with 22,000 objections. And the participatory model had no leeway to really address that. And which brings me back to what's needed right now is an investment. And I won't go into these projects, but the mod school by the Social Design Collaborative, you have the Chakarpur Bandh restoration by I.M. Gurgaon, also the work that Bhi Dilli has been doing are so important because they give you proof of concept. And we have so much data, we have so much years of actually the plans being made but not really being implemented, and so much of it is daunting. So these smaller interventions that really push through the clutter are important beyond what they achieve in the project themselves. They have the capacity of just expanding your imagination of what is possible at a fine-grained level. But I think it's high time we actually depend on people really going above and beyond, civil society, as well as individuals who are invested, and demand that our planning processes actually have incubation and innovation tapped into them, so that you have incremental projects that are really small in scale and frankly small enough to fail, so that they give you the capacity of scaling up, which is actually based on A, proof of concept, B, the thing is in India, one thing that I've noticed is that we are really slow, but once there is one successful model, then there's an enthusiasm to really sort of embrace that to such a degree that sometimes it's embraced in places where it doesn't or it shouldn't be. I'll wrap up now with a couple of things. I would invite a lot of you to visit this photo essay, and they have an Instagram page called Women at Leisure. And this is nothing, it's simply a photo essay of women inhabiting their bodies and inhabiting public as well as private space and just relaxing. You know, just feeling safe, secure, reading a book, chatting with friends, flirting with boys, climbing a tree. And it's so simple, but it's so profound because you realize that the luxury to do so is not available to a whole lot of women in public sphere who have to sort of like, what do you call it? Really worry about security, etc., to really not indulge in simple pleasures. And I'd like to end with that because, Saleha, to go back to your point, you know, there's so much of this is really daunting and out of scale and overwhelming. And there's a lot of smart people and things like smart city missions kind of tackling this in all kinds of ways. But the thing, and this is part of actually one of those pandemic projects that I'm now working very closely, collaborating, thought of with a friend Virkindhar, who is the artist and architect and a curator. This is a thing that we're working on. It's called the Heart Cities Mission. It's really, I think, the missing point in all of this, because the outcomes are really not guaranteed. But I really feel that eventually in this very large scale thing, that when we're talking about planning, we're talking about local area plans, we're talking about socio-economic, blah, 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 blah. The thing that one is trying to do in a city of 22 million is try and see how narratives of this diverse mix of humanities can be included and amplified, and simply like what we are gearing towards, climate change, pandemics, all of them taken into sort of like consideration, is that, you know, to go back to these images, that every citizen is able to sort of live and enjoy simple pleasures with dignity. That's really, I think for me, that's something that one can lean on to sort of simplify the hyper complexity of the entire exercise. So that's about it. Thank you very much. And also thank you for the incredible work that the campaign has been doing through a very uncertain and tough period in general. Thanks.
No, thank you. Thank you, Amrita, for leaving us with that thought and for giving us these prevalent paradoxes that it'll be relevant even 20 years from now, but it's something to keep questioning as we move forward. You know, we've overshot the session time, but we will very quickly open the floor for some question answers. We'll take a few. If you have to ask a question, just raise your hands and we'll choose the sequence. We'll take a minimum of 3 to 4. And if we go beyond 8, I'm sorry, but we'll be able to take lots of questions beyond that. So we have a hard stop at 8. Any person who'd like to ask, please switch on your video, ask your question. Oh. Hi, Riddhi. Go on.
I have a question which is actually for all of the speakers, which is that what were some of the instruments that helped enable citizen participation in the previous master plans of Delhi, particularly the 1960s plan, which I think was geared towards more citizen participation? And how applicable would such methods be today, given how much Delhi has changed, grown, and how diverse it's become?
Would anyone like to take that?
To engage public participation, what were the instruments that were used by the TCPO and the DBA?
To the best of my understanding, the plan it comprised of 3 components. A, after all the studies, a land use map with what uses would be allowed in each use zone, a color map. It was to a scale of about roughly 1 inch per mile or 1 to 50,000. That was the only map which you had to comment on. You had a kind of a matrix of uses which were allowed in each of the use zones. And third, very importantly, what were the development control guidelines, which largely were like FAR, parking, setbacks, height control, and so on, as distinct from building bylaws. And these were largely the kind of, it was a very ambitious plan, and it assumed that all the land was in the public domain. So it was freely prepared plan, it more or less heading towards the City Beautiful movement. That was one of the explanations. Prairie planning, as they say in America. So there were a lot of correctives proposed to that. As I said, the 600, some people who analyzed it said they were not really, there were suggestions which were largely accepted. But the question of people feeling, look, how adversely am I affected by the plan did not exist there. That opportunity was not really built into that plan. But how much would that plan help the city to grow in 20 years seemed to be the kind of guiding force, and everyone's life would be improved in the process. That seemed to be a very major. One has to remember a lot of Delhi had what you call unauthorized structures, usurped structures. Now, removing them and putting them into proper units, which is being tried now, is not a very easy thing. And I still remember 1987, year of shelter for the homeless, was really proposed the year of housing for the homeless. And they found out when you use the term housing, and the two things happened at the time. In most of the world, slums was considered as a start of a housing process. It was not considered as a dirty word and you had to bomb them out. And so the whole question of slum upgrading and slum improvement did not exist. So there were all these kind of issues. But largely, I don't think that the Delhi plan was really replicable. In fact, the Ford Foundation who prepared that plan, and they used a lot of influence on the powers that be hovering around Panditji, really tried to remove bottlenecks and get it through. But within a couple of years, they went to Calcutta and they started a new slogan: development, yes, planning, no. You see, so that was the slogan used. But the CMDA plan, which emerged, was probably a more balanced document. I know that's all I can say, because you're referring to the original plan, but the transformations it has gone through. Also, you must realize the transformations that have taken place at the national level. That happened at a time when you looked at the national level, a difference between town and villages. You see, you had a function. City was given a function. And Delhi was an administrative function. And it was town versus village. Over a period of time, it became urban versus rural, a more embracing term, right? And finally, it became now municipality versus panchayat, or municipality in consonance with panchayats. But these anyway, so these are the kind of changes which have taken place. And so, I don't know, all these changes have to be addressed, and no longer are you looking at a plan in isolation or a plan with its immediate surrounding, a plan in even a mega city in the national and international context. The function of Delhi has changed. It is no longer what you call a single or a double function city. It's multifunctional, like all mega cities and all metros of India. It is also multimodal in transport. So you see, in that context, you have to see where do the people stand. And I don't know, just there's one thing I would like to, react, if I can, on something about Mehrauli, if I may. I don't know, but up to the, may I?
Yes, absolutely. Please go ahead.
Yeah, in Mehrauli, the very critical area are the wards. The wards is a municipal function. First of all, let us see who are the decision makers, political decision makers. The members of parliament who are 7 with a constituency as large as 2.5 to 3 million. 70 members of the assembly who have something like a constituency of 2 to 3 lakhs, right? And you have the ward councillors who are 284 in number, leaving out NDMC and cantonment board. They have the constituency which is smaller. That is the ward, right? I think the role of the MLA is not that critical as it is important ultimately, but it's the role of the councillor. Who is the councillor? I think if you prepare a map with the very good data you have now and point out your area of jurisdiction, if you show, and you'll find so many things you have to put as the touch me nots. Because it's a historic area. Which are the areas under the control of the ASI? Point it out. It is a bit vague at the moment, but force the ASI to point it out clearly. Which are the areas under their control? Buildings and the lands around it. Force them to identify, not them, now it is the NMA, the 100 meters, 200 meters line. You have to show this. And finally, when you are showing it is the archaeological park, it is shown in the plan. Archaeological park is not in their mandate. The archaeological park has to come in the master plan. There are now proposals for 7 or 8. Once you show all this, and once you show the touch-me-nots, the railways, etc., you will get a correct picture for you to find what sort of action you can take in that area. And all the time, the accountability the process has to be through the ward councillor, and it is through his or her accountability. And if you don't address that right now, it may be a little frustrating. And you may find if you do it, participation may be a little easier. I don't know. This is just a suggestion.
No, absolutely correct. In fact, Professor Ribeiro, we did start with the councillors in Mehrauli itself. And over time, there were 2 councillors. First, the husband was the councillor, then the wife became the councillor. And it was a difficult process to really engage them in the development of Mehrauli, and there are lots of dynamics. There are 8 RWAs within that ward itself. So a lot of different issues, but your point is completely taken. The accountability and the responsibility is actually with the councillor, and they know the area well, better than anybody actually. And if we work with them, I think that's the key. But totally point taken, and there's lots of work needs to be done for capacity building of those councillors, like the map that you're saying, and addressing various issues, understanding what are the challenges, and not just looking at things superficially. But yes, agree with you on that. It's a difficult thing, but it needs to be done. There is no two way about it.
Unfortunately, one of our speakers needs to leave. So in case there are more questions coming in, we're happy to carry forward this conversation on any of our social media. We're available on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'll just link the pages on the chat box below. And we'll definitely play a facilitator's role where we'll put the questions forward to the speakers and they can give you a lengthy response. And I'd just like to say that the DDA's deadline for filing in objections, we still have 3 more days to go. So in case you haven't filed in, I hope this session was insightful and you could take something from this and file your suggestions and objections. And please, spread the message and ask, like, pester your families, friends, people in your neighborhood to really object to the current plan. And yeah, I hope I'm not missing out on anything. I'll just quickly link our social media pages on the chat box below. Apologies for playing the bad cop here and stopping the session abruptly, but we've overshot, and it's not nice to keep people hanging. So I'm just doing that. Give me a second.
Nidhi, Riddhi, I just wanted to add one point to the question you had asked, two actually. One is that in today's date, the access to technology in terms of visualization and modeling consequences, as well as social media to amplify concerns that might otherwise not have found platforms to be voiced, really alter the landscape of participatory engagement. The second thing, which I think has to be stressed quite majorly, is that, now for some decades, in other parts of the world, definitely under the EU and UK Planning Act, etc., consultation and outreach and the impetus of making sure that there are actually tools and mechanisms and grievance mechanisms also to make sure that a hyper-technical document like a master plan is accessible and understandable to all sectors of the society. The onus is on the people developing the master plan. So, and there's enough actually from World Bank to different planning acts that lists out that this is expected out of the consultation and post master plan outreach processes, how it's designed, who it's worked with. And I feel participatory planning has been spoken about for a while, and these days it's one of those like, oh, we had a meeting, but there is no structuring to what the process is and what differentiates a meaningful consultation from tokenism. So these are two things that one just needs to, I think, help in today's climate with inclusive planning. Then I'll close now since we've overshot. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all the speakers who've come, Professor Ribeiro, Nidhi. Thank you so much for being with us today. Yeah, Celia.
Yeah, I'd just like to reiterate that some of you've come on last minute, just believing that we'll be able to manage this, and it's really amazing to hear and gather insights from beyond Delhi, and really looking forward to learning from you and people like you. We're going to be having more such sessions, so please join us and just contribute to all the learnings that are going to be coming out of this. So thank you so much for spending Friday evening with us, And yeah, we can end the session now. Please follow us on our social media and file those objections because we still have 3 more days to go.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Amrita.
Thank you, Professor Ribeiro. Thank you,
Thank
Nidhi.
you,
Thank you so
Professor.
much.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you for joining, everybody. Thank you so much.